If you would like a free newsletter on this or other subjects, just give us a call at Christian Answers. The phone number is area code 512-218-8022. That's 512-218-8022. Or you could email us at cdebater@aol.com. That's cdebater@aol.com. Thank you.
Greetings and welcome once again to our program. I'm Larry Wessels, Director of Christian Answers, and I want to thank you for joining us today. With me is my colleague at Christian Answers, our Director of Research, Steve Morrison. Great to have you here, Steve.
Thank you, Larry.
Steve is the Director of Research for a reason. He does a lot of research, and he has done extensive research into the subject of Islam, of which this is series show number 8. We've already done 7 previous shows in a series on Islam, asking the question, does the Muslim religion send someone to hell? We're trying to answer that question. Can believing the religion of Islam send you to hell? Of course, the word hell is a biblical term coming from the Bible. So Islam has borrowed that term from the Bible and incorporated it into the Qur'an. So Muslim viewers as well as Christian viewers accept the reality of hell. Now what we want to find out is, can believing Islam send you to this hell that's talked about, particularly in the Bible? In fact, Jesus talked more about more about hell than he ever did about heaven in the New Testament. Right. So that's something to consider. Okay, as I mentioned before, we've covered a lot of territory in this series on Islam. We've covered the origins of Islam, we've covered the Quran, the changes in the Quran. We've talked about the Prophet Muhammad. We've talked about manuscript evidence for the Old and New Testaments. We've dealt with a lot of things in this series, and if you're interested, please contact our ministry to get your hands on this if you desire to get that information, or contact the cable company and ask them to replay these shows on Access TV so you'll have a chance to see them, because we've covered a lot of material. We don't have time to go through it all now. What we're going to talk about now is something called the Gospel of Barnabas. But we want to approach it in a different light. So the title of this show is called The Forgery of the Gospel of Barnabas. And Steve has done a lot of research on this, and it ties into the subject of Islam, because Muslim apologists and Muslim spokesmen, in their attempts to attack Christianity and the validity of Christian doctrines, will bring up the Gospel of Barnabas. Mm-hmm. And so this is an issue that we felt was pertinent to this whole series on Islam and needed to be dealt with. So, brother, go ahead and talk about this outline we have on the screen right now.
Okay.
In brief. And then we'll go into more serious detail here.
Well, we're going to give some background. Just most people haven't heard of it, and as you'll find out later, probably for good reason. And then we're going to see some contradictions between the Gospel of Barnabas on one hand and the Bible and the Quran agreeing on the other hand. Then we'll see differences of the Gospel of Barnabas in the Bible, then differences with it and the Quran. Then we're going to see some general errors, some kind of silly things almost, and other historical anachronisms. And then we're going to try to play sleuth or detective, so to speak, and try to find out who probably wrote the Gospel of Barnabas.
Okay. With that, we're going to start with the scripture verse, as you can see here, John 8:24. It says, "Therefore I said to you that you will die in your sins. For if you do not believe that I am He, you will die in your sins." Now this is a very significant verse, brother, and it'll take a little bit of a theological explanation for a lot of people to really understand what he's saying here. So go ahead and expound on that a little bit.
All right, Jesus is speaking here, and he's telling the scribes and the Pharisees and the Jews in general that Jesus is the promised Messiah. Okay, if you do not believe that Jesus is who He claims to be, you will indeed die in your sins. Now, in the Quran, it does not say, they differ from Christianity. Muslims do not say that Jesus is the Son of God. They do not say he's a part of the Trinity. But in the Quran, it does say that Jesus is the Messiah, or Christ in Greek. And so Muslims and Christians at least agree on that title. The Gospel of Barnabas says that Muhammad was the Messiah, not Jesus. Now, Muslims actually do not say that Muhammad was the Messiah. Okay, but that's what the Gospel of Barnabas says.
So you're saying right off the bat, the Gospel of Barnabas, which Muslim apologists bring up a lot, the Gospel of Barnabas says that Muhammad was the Messiah.
Yes.
And of course, they wouldn't believe that.
No, the Quran says Jesus is the one who's the Messiah.
Right. So it's interesting they would bring up a book that they themselves don't even believe in.
Right.
But anyway, we'll get into all that.
Right.
Okay, now let's get into some basic background.
Okay. Well, the Gospel of Barnabas, the first language that the only copy that we really have, the language it was written in was in Italian. Okay, and it was written sometime we only know about after 1588. Okay, which is what over 1500 years after Christ. Okay. Also, we found other quote gospels and similar things that were forgeries done by Moors of Spain, and we know that they were forgeries. So if you're a Muslim, just imagine this. Imagine somebody runs to you and says, guess what? We found a new surah that's supposed to be in the Quran. Now, they would say, well, the earliest copy was in Arabic, you ask? No, it was actually in Italian, a language of the Middle Ages. They didn't even speak Italian in Jesus' time. They spoke Latin, for example. And imagine that there were things in this surah, or alleged new surah, that contradicted both what was in the Bible and contradicted what was in the Quran. And imagine it contained some historical errors that were fairly easy to prove. If you were a Muslim, you'd probably have a hard time believing this surah. And if you can understand that, you can see why Christians have a hard time believing this ought to be in the Bible also. So
it's sort of like, let's say, this so-called new surah that was suddenly discovered, and it should be in the Quran, and it said something like, well, Muhammad was a skydiver who loved to eat French fries at McDonald's.
Right, that has some historical anachronisms.
So there would be a real difficulty there, and that's what we're saying about Barnabas. There's some anachronisms that simply don't match up historically to the text. And one other thing I'd like you to mention just briefly here, in our previous show in this installment series, show number 7 on our Islam subject, we covered extensively manuscript evidence for the Old and New Testaments. We brought up the Dead Sea Scrolls, brought up early church fathers, brought up a lot of research material that anyone that's interested, like I said, contact our ministry or the cable company and get a rebroadcast of that. Without going into all that detail, mention the fact that here we've got all this manuscript evidence going way back in time for the Bible, the New Testament scriptures, but there doesn't seem to be that same situation with the Gospel of Barnabas.
There is absolutely none. There's no manuscript evidence. Furthermore, you have all these early Christians, and even all through the ages, quoting from various books of the Bible and everything, but you have no quotes from the Gospel of Barnabas. Now, I should say that one particular Muslim writer named Rahman, he mistakenly thought there was, because there is a totally different book. It's called the Epistle of Barnabas, or Letter of Barnabas, and that was an early Christian letter written by a Christian, and he actually has that confused with the Gospel of Barnabas. We have the Epistle of Barnabas in the early church writings prior to Nicaea, which you can see over here. You can read the letter of Barnabas, and you can also read the text of the Gospel of Barnabas, translated from Italian to English, and they're totally different books. All they have is Barnabas in the name. So he messed up on that, but other Muslims haven't. So understanding that he made a mistake there is no evidence whatsoever in early history for the Gospel of Barnabas.
So basically, the earliest you can find then is the date you gave, 1588.
Yeah, around 1588. They don't know the exact date.
So we're looking closer to 2,000 years from the original source.
Yeah.
And this is being appealed to as some kind of valid document by Muslim spokesmen and debaters.
Right.
Okay, let's go to our chart here that the people at home can look at while you talk about it. We've got contradicting both the Bible and the Quran. That would be the Gospel of Barnabas, contradicting both the Bible and the Quran. Can you take us through this, Steve?
Yes. First of all, I'll say that when you see page numbers, the page numbers were a translation of the Gospel of Barnabas done by Lonsdale and Laura Ragg. And it's from Bakhtiar Printers in Lahore, Pakistan. Printed in Pakistan because Muslims are very interested in this. So that's from that. And anyway, the first contradiction is the Gospel of Barnabas says Jesus is not the Messiah in chapter 83, page 181, and chapter 97, 223, and chapter 42, 97. Now, Jesus is called the Messiah Christ in a number of places in the Quran. In Surahs 575, 517, 2 times, Surahs 345, 4, 157, and 171, 172, and Surah 9, verse 30. And now the surahs aren't saying anything about Christ being Son of God or Trinity or anything like that, but they are using the word saying that he was the Messiah. The Jews of course expected the Messiah. Okay, so that's the first problem. Now the second problem is that the Gospel of Barnabas says the Messiah is Muhammad. Now it gets worse. They say a lot more things about Muhammad that are never ascribed in any Islamic writings, but Messiah is Muhammad in chapter 97. Okay, and then it says also that a prophet's words were only to the people that they were sent to. Now this contradicts Surah 4, 150 to 151, where it says you can't separate between the messengers and the prophets of God. One messenger of God can't say, for an example, go left, and the others say don't go left, go right. But the Quran says that, but the Gospel of Barnabas is trying to say, well, you can forget about Jesus now completely and just follow Muhammad. Okay. It also says Ishmael was an ancestor of the Messiah, which, if they think Muhammad was the answer to the Messiah, you can see why the Gospel of Barnabas would say that. But if Jesus was the Messiah and he was Jewish, then it was Isaac, not Ishmael. All right. Then it gets to things that aren't in normal Muslim theology at all. It says that God created all things for the Messiah. Okay. Now, actually, in the Bible, in the book of Colossians, it does say all things were created through Christ.
By him and for him.
But in the Quran, it doesn't say all things were created for Muhammad. Okay. Mm-hmm. So anyway, and specifically, it says in chapter 39, Muhammad is the one he's talking about, shall be my messenger, for whom I have created all things, who shall give light to the world when he shall come, whose soul was set in a celestial splendor 60,000 years before I made anything. So Muhammad's soul was set in splendor 60,000 years before the whole rest of creation, according to the Gospel of Barnabas.
The Gospel of Barnabas, talking about Muhammad,
right,
saying he's the Messiah and that all things are created for Muhammad.
Right.
Basically, it has to be if it's coming from the Gospel of Barnabas.
Right. And then it says, the messenger of God, that is Muhammad, shall answer, O Lord, I remember that when thou didst create me, thou saidst that thou had willed to make for love of me the world and paradise and angels and men, that they might glorify thee by me thy servant. Okay.
Chapter 55, page 131. Also, chapter 56, page 133.
Right. And it says, without faith in Muhammad, none will be saved. Okay. Muslims do not actually say that. They believe that if a child dies in infancy, that even though they didn't hear Muhammad, it's possible for them, to go to paradise. And they believe that maybe somebody who tried to follow God and didn't know about Muhammad, never rejected Muhammad, it's possible for them to go to paradise. So Muslims don't actually say that.
And that reference there was from the Gospel of Barnabas, chapter 192, page 429.
Right. So there are a bunch of differences with the Gospel of Barnabas and the Bible and the Quran. Then there are some other differences with just the Bible. It said that Jesus was a voice in the wilderness in chapter 42:97. Okay, well, from the Bible, who was the voice in the wilderness?
John the Baptist.
Right.
Was a voice crying in the wilderness.
So,
in the Old Testament, New Testament, it's all over the place.
Yeah. Now the idea of a voice crying in the wilderness, I have not really seen that in the Quran. So I think we can see a pattern here. The writer of the Gospel of Barnabas is taking Christian thoughts and Christian theology, changing them a little bit, and then trying to jam them into Muslim thoughts and theology, and coming into something that's really neither Muslim nor Christian.
This almost sounds, in a way, like a parallel with what Muhammad did himself with the Bible. He's got Christian terms and theologies that he brings into the Quran and mixes it in with some of the current cultural religions and themes that were around in his day there on the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, and comes up with a homogenized version of a religion.
Right.
It sounds like this is what's happening in the Gospel of Barnabas as well.
Right. And another thing, it claims the angels rolled the soldiers away for Jesus. Well, the angels rolled the stone away. He kind of got that one mixed up a little bit. And then it said that Muhammad...
That's chapter 153. I'm mainly doing this for our audio soundtracks.
Okay.
Because some people won't have a chance to see the video,
Okay.
but they will listen to the tape. So that's chapter 153, page 355.
All right. It said Muhammad was coming, which, the Bible doesn't say that Muhammad's coming. It says Christ will come again, but that's it. Christ is the fulfillment.
That's right. That's chapter 44, page 105.
Okay. And now there are some other differences that, either the Bible doesn't speak about or they don't really contradict the Bible, but they do seem to contradict things in the Quran. For example, faithful Muslims who do not have works, they will be in hell for 70,000 years.
Chapter 137, page 319.
Right, and there's nothing I have read in the Bukhari Hadith that has that specifies that at all. Okay.
Well, 70,000 years in hell.
They don't have works.
Wow, so if Muslims watching this series, and of course the title of our Muslim series here is Can the Muslim Religion Send You to Hell? If you go with the Gospel of Barnabas, you're in danger if you don't have the right kind of works.
Right.
To go to hell for 70,000 years.
Right.
But then what happens after that is the question.
Then I guess they go to paradise after that. And this sounds, vaguely like they're almost trying to take the non-biblical Catholic doctrine of purgatory and trying to fit it into a Muslim
right, it's
mold,
just
so
an
to speak.
homogenized. He's taking things from the traditions of Christianity, like Roman Catholicism, for instance. And see, this makes sense that the Gospel of Barnabas couldn't have been around at the time of the early church, because we're starting to see some things here that we know weren't around until much later.
We'll get into that a lot more in just a little bit.
Okay,
all right.
Very good.
But anyway, it says that Muhammad will go to hell. Okay, I've read all the hadiths, I've read all the Quran, I've also read all the Bible, and I've never read a Muslim source saying Muhammad is going to hell.
It says Muhammad will go to hell,
and he'll be terrified as he beholds the punishments of others.
Okay, so I guess basically he's saying he'll go to hell to look at the punishment of others.
Visiting hell, not staying
there. For a minute
forever.
there, I was thinking, Muhammad himself is going to go to hell.
Yeah, no, kind of almost like visiting hell.
It's chapter 135, page 315.
Right. It said that Mary gave birth to Jesus without pain. Okay.
Chapter 3, page 9.
Right, and Mary cried out, and some medieval Catholics did think that about Mary, but the Quran, says that when Mary was in pain, giving birth to Jesus, and we believe that, as far as we know, Mary had the typical pains of childbirth. Okay. It says it's unlawful to hate anything except sin. Okay, well, at least in a lot of Muslim theology and a lot of the hadiths, you curse Christians. You're supposed to hate all his enemies and hate lots of things. But this is almost like maybe not a Sunni Muslim thought, but maybe a thought of some other Muslims. Now, as Christians, we can accept this, but this is not really something that's an Islamic teaching.
And that's from chapter 86, page 199.
Right, and they say God is a father. Okay, now
chapter 133, page 307.
Okay, now Islam is generally very careful to say that God does not have any sons. And of course, while the Quran said he had daughters, Islam says that Allah doesn't have any children, period.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so they don't call God a father. But in the Gospel of Barnabas, Christians frequently refer to God the Father, and so if you kind of take this Christian concept and merge it in again. And then it says that God is our Father, though he doesn't have sons, so it's kind of trying to combine them.
Chapter 17, page 31 and 33.
Right, and then it says there will be no envy in heaven. And that contradicts some of the things in the Bukhari Hadith about paradise.
That's right. Chapter 177, page 401.
Okay. All right. Now, these are some mainly more doctrinal and theological contradictions. There are some serious contradictions that makes us wonder if the writer really knew very much about the Mideast and about Palestine in general. Okay. How do you sail to an inland city? If someone said, I'm going to sail on a ship to, let's say, the middle of Saudi Arabia, you would kind of question their knowledge of geography.
Or they would argue, well, maybe there's a river that goes there.
But anyway, it says in the Gospel of Barnabas that Jesus went to the Sea of Galilee, which is a small lake actually, and it does have a river coming out. And having embarked on a ship, he sailed to a city of Nazareth. Okay.
Chapter 20, page 41.
Right. Well, Nazareth is inland. There is no river connecting the Sea of Galilee and Nazareth. Now, you might want to, I don't know if you would, but if the river were right and you had a strong enough modern ship and you wanted to try going up the Jordan River, which really isn't navigable, but if you want to try to do that, you might go to the Sea of Galilee, and then you might get off the ship at the Sea of Galilee and go to Nazareth. But you wouldn't go to the Sea of Galilee to get on a ship, and your ship go to Nazareth. Okay, and that's chapter 20, page 41. And then it said that the Romans said that their idols were almighty. Okay.
Chapter 152, page 353.
Right. And the Romans never said that. The Romans, they would accept even struggles between the different gods. They never said that they were almighty. It says that the Canaanites despised the Pharisees.
Chapter 144, page 335.
All right. Well, there were very few Canaanites left in Jesus' time. The Canaanites lived, during the times of Joshua and the conquest, and a little bit after. And there's nothing in anywhere that says of Canaanites despising any Pharisees.
Right.
Except being made up.
Which is what I think we're reading. Made up stuff.
All right. Some other thing is the Pharisees in Jesus' time were very strange in their ascetic practices. Ascetic practices are like, fasting all the time, denying yourself, maybe, living in terrible clothes. And
that contradicts everything we know from history and the biblical record themselves, and even what Jesus said about them. But that's chapter 145, page 337 through 339.
Right. And then there are a bunch of just kind of general funny things said about the Pharisees. I guess he made it up and thought, well, no one in Italy in the Middle Ages would know any better anyway.
Chapter 143.
Right.
I won't worry about the page numbers.
Okay. And then Rome, he said, had 28,000 gods. Well, they did have a large number of idol gods they worshiped, but not 28,000.
Chapter 152,
right.
page 353.
Now it said that the Roman Senate decreed that none should call Jesus God or Son of God, or speak of Jesus. Well, in Jesus' time, right at Jesus' time, they did not even hear of Jesus.
Yeah, that's chapter 98, page 227.
Yeah, now, maybe, sometime after, you had Suetonius and Tacitus and Pliny the Younger, when they were Christians, 100 AD, 150 AD, yeah, different story. They did hear of Jesus, but that was not while Jesus was alive.
Chapter 157, page 367 also.
Okay, and the Roman Senate didn't make a decree about that, and it said that people who preach penitence sounds like a good medieval Roman Catholic word.
That's right.
They were called Nazarenes after Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay, Jesus was not a Nazarene. Nazarenes were to never cut their hair and to never do certain things. John the Baptist was a Nazarene, actually, but Jesus was not.
That's chapter 194, page 433.
Okay, and the archangels, it said, were Michael, Raphael, and Uriel. And there were considered 4 archangels in the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, and that's pretty much pointing to exactly where this is coming from.
And that's chapter 209, chapter 215, and chapter 220 for those angels there.
All right, and then when there's some stuff there that's just kind of strange, like they say that God miraculously swapped, I guess, the bodies or whatever of Judas and Jesus, to where all the people thought they were crucifying Jesus, but it was really Judas. And when they mistook him for Jesus, Judas just smiled.
That's chapter 216, page 471.
All right, and that Israel said that Jesus was God or the Son of God.
Chapter 138, page 321. That one's hard to believe. He put it in there, didn't he?
Yeah. Now, it said that Barnabas was a disciple of Jesus, when the truth is he was not a disciple of Jesus. All right, he wasn't one of the 12.
That's chapter 83, chapter 88, chapter 19, and chapter 72.
Okay. Also says there was a great famine in Israel in Jesus' time.
Chapter 138, page 321.
All right, sometime after Jesus' time, and Paul, we're talking maybe 20 years later, there was a famine in that part of the world, but there wasn't a great famine just in Israel in Jesus' time. Okay, it said that God gave Jesus bad consequences, so God punished Jesus because others called Jesus God.
Chapter 112 and page 257.
Yeah.
So,
now, I would be interested if any Muslim anywhere could find anything in Muslim teaching saying how God punished Jesus because others worship him. From what I've seen, I don't think it's there in Islamic teaching.
Right, because it's so alien to Islamic teaching anyway.
Right.
Because they don't hold him to be God in the flesh.
Right.
Just a prophet who talked as a baby, and his mother Mary shook a palm tree and got some things like that.
Right. And then it talks about the mountains of Samaria. Samaria, was on a mountain, but there weren't mountains plural.
That's chapter 81, page 189.
So here are some of the funny things that there were errors. And just to kind of reiterate here is we're not saying that the Quran, in this segment, we're not saying that the Quran or had these problems, or that the Quran taught these things, or that Muslim tradition taught these things. What we're doing is we're saying the Gospel of Barnabas teaches these things, and since these things are against the Bible and against the Quran, why in the world do some Muslim apologists try to appeal to this book, the Gospel of Barnabas, just because it mentions Muhammad?
Right, and also what we're about to go into here, the historical anachronisms, prove beyond a shadow of doubt it's a fraudulent book. I mean, it's just if I could write something right now, some religion, I could just create my own religion, write it and stick it somewhere, and then maybe 1,000 years from now, someone will find it, and they may start a religion around it or believe it, but it would have to have something going for it. But I'm sure after a while, the way I talk, you can start to tell, oh, this guy probably lived in Texas. he mentioned the Longhorn football team somewhere. That's right. And there'd be things giving it away of what. My religion that I wrote about, I'm trying to make it look like it's going further back than that or something. But there'll be little things because of where the time frame I find myself trapped in, and I'm writing, trying to make it look like it came from somewhere else. There's things that'll give me away to the public. Right. Well, what Steve is about to show you is things that give the Gospel of Barnabas away and show that it's somebody else writing it, trying to make it look like it goes somewhere else. It's fraudulent. And like he was just saying, why appeal to something that is not true? The anachronisms give it away, showing that somebody just made it up. Muslims themselves wouldn't accept a lot of this stuff that's in there because of the doctrinal problems we already brought up with Islam. And so these in my opinion, are a backbreaker to prove that it's a fraudulent book and it's not worthy to be even brought up in a serious religious debate as an apologetic weapon to attack the Bible or the Quran in this case. So go ahead, bro.
Okay. So just give an example, and now our curiosity is aroused in the how or who wrote the Gospel of Barnabas. Well, one clue is it talks about coins in chapter 54. It says a golden denarius was divided into 60 minutai. Okay, that was not true of coins in Bible times, but it was true of Spanish coins at that time.
In the Middle Ages, in the 1500s.
Yeah, and so there are some kind of like Spanish versus Italian theories that we'll get into. Okay, Abraham's father claimed there were an infinite number of gods. Well, the Sumerians did not have the concept of infinity.
And that's chapter 26, page 57.
Right. And then it said, when it talked about when the forbidden fruit was going down Adam's throat, it got stuck. So he put his hand to his throat, and that's why every man, but not a woman, has an Adam. That's what's called a slang term, an Adam's apple. And Adam's apple was a medieval European phrase. They never thought that. They never called it Adam's apple, and they never thought that in Bible.
And you don't have that in any church history before the medieval times.
Right.
And that's chapter 40, page 93.
Okay. Right. Now Pilate was the governor, or
Pilate was not.
He was a governor when Jesus was crucified, but he wasn't the governor when Jesus was born.
Ah, yes. So the Gospel of Barnabas is saying that Pilate was the governor of Judea at the time Jesus was born, and we know scripturally,
Herod was the king.
Historically, even because they've even found some archaeological evidences to Pilate, it could not be true factually in time and history.
Right.
And that reference right there can be found in chapter 3, page 7.
Right. It says Jesus was taught to fast, do alms, make prayer, and go on pilgrimage.
And that's chapter 89, page 207.
Yeah, basically trying to make Jesus into a Muslim here.
Yeah, because those are part of the 5 pillars of Islam.
Right.
And Islam, of course, we know wasn't known before 600 when Muhammad, although they did do those things in the Quraysh tribes, I
Right.
believe, which predate Muhammad. But still, you're getting something here that the Jews particularly didn't participate in that context.
Yeah, the Jews didn't really have what they call pilgrimage. They did go to Jerusalem typically once a year, but that was a different thing. All right, so anyway, now it talked about the Jubilee was 100 years. Now, it was not, the Jubilee was a time in the Roman Catholic Church where they had special indulgences, and they had just made it 100 years right before we think the Gospel of Barnabas was written.
Okay, so in the medieval times, again, that's when the Jubilee was made 100 years by the Catholic
Right.
Church. And here there's a reference to it in chapter 83, page 191 through 193.
Right. Now in the Old Testament, there is once every 7 years you're supposed to let your lands lie fallow, and once every 49 years there's a special jubilee. But that's 49. That's not 100.
Right.
Okay. Now I talked about the king's barons. Okay, that's pretty much a giveaway that we're talking about medieval times here.
Chapter 131, page 301.
You desire horses like knights. They have knights with armor in Jesus'
Chapter
time.
69 and page 159. Now, these, the barons and knights,
Uh-huh.
I mean, how medieval can you get?
Right. The burden of the republic. Okay.
Chapter 69, page 161.
All right. You had courtiers and
Chapter 133, page 307.
that's medieval. And then after the nightly prayer, which sounds like an Islamic thing, they try to stick in
Chapter
there.
131, page 299.
Okay. Talked about the pinnacle where the scribes used to preach.
Chapter 127, chapter 129, and chapter 12.
All right. The Jewish scribes.
Well, talk about the pinnacle. What
Well, that might be a combination of things. One of Jesus's temptations was Satan took him to the pinnacle of the temple and said, throw yourself down because God's angel will protect you. But then also in the Muslim minarets, in the mosque, they have somebody there who calls people to prayer. Mm-hmm. Doesn't actually preach from there, but it calls people to prayer.
Right.
And the pinnacle where the scribes preached, the Jews just never did that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The other thing is it talked about, in talking about the prodigal son, it talked about him having new hose. And of course, the men wore hose, on their legs in the Middle Ages.
Oh yeah,
in
medieval
Europe.
hose that I've seen a lot
Right.
of paintings and etchings and things referred to. That's chapter 147, page 241.
Right. Now, two things here. It says God is not composite and man is composite.
That's chapter 161, page 377, and chapter 168, page 389.
And what we're getting into here is more medieval philosophy that was not studied or thought about in earlier times. And what it's saying is that if God is a simple being, if he is one way, then he has to be all at one way because he's infinite, while man is a mixture of different things. Okay, well, while that's kind of neither here nor there, you don't really see that in the Quran or in the Bible, and you don't really see that in philosophical thought, until the Middle Ages.
Right. Okay, next one.
All right, the other one, it sounds like a medieval business relationship. Lazarus and his sisters were proprietors in the other towns of Magdala and Bethany. We might talk about like a chain store of inns today.
Proprietors, eh?
Okay, and that Jesus, or what looked like Jesus, but was really, God switched to be Judas, was dressed as a juggler when he was being crucified.
Chapter 217, page 479. Reminds me of an old Danny Kaye movie I saw. I think it was called A Court Jester.
Mm-hmm.
And he did some, I think in that movie he did some juggling, so he was a jester in a medieval court.
Okay.
And when I saw that, I thought of Danny Kaye in his clown outfit in this medieval court, as a court jester. Mm-hmm. And this kind of just rings a bell with all this other medieval stuff we see popping up here.
Okay. So then it talks about pine cones, which you think of more in, I guess, Europe or a heavily forested area. You don't think of in Jerusalem so much.
Chapter 113, page 259.
Yeah, they did and do have trees in Israel, olive trees and things like that, but not like Northern European trees. All right, they had fistula. Most people probably don't know what that is. That was an opening made in the body. Either a surgeon might make an opening in it for drainage, or it might just appear as a result of an injury or disease for pus and stuff to drain out. Kind of medical practices like they did in the Middle Ages.
Okay, so but it's not a medical practice that was wide known back at the beginning of time.
Right.
That's chapter 128 or chapter 120, page 275.
And so that Jesus could not read when he was 12 years old. Well, he was discussing scriptures with the scribes when he was 12 years old, so Jesus in particular could read, but many of the Jewish people, they really valued learning, and that they had schools for the kids, and so probably not just Jesus, but probably most educated Jewish kids could read at 12, not to mention most Greek and Roman kids.
Yeah, so that's just an error in historical fact here, chapter 9, page 15.
Yeah.
Because you just go to the biblical records and see when he's in the temple, they're
Right.
all amazed at his understanding and learning.
Right. Now, in the Middle Ages, many European peasants couldn't read, when they're 12 and older. Doing penance is a medieval Christian concept. It's not.
That's coming again from the Roman Catholic theology, and so here you have this concept of penance tying back to that Roman Catholic doctrine
Right.
mentioned in chapter 121, page 277,
Okay.
and once again giving away, historical imperfection here.
Yeah. Now, if you're kind of wondering what's the purpose of the writer making up the Gospel of Barnabas, I think we kind of see that in the next one. Jesus made prayer in union with the messenger of God and heard Muhammad's voice.
That's chapter 84, page 195.
All right, so we heard Muhammad's voice before he was born. Well, I guess it could be a miracle, but you see how this is all kind of made up for the purpose of showing how Jesus prophesied Muhammad, and so you see why it might be a temptation for Muslim apologists to want to use this because it mentions Muhammad.
Well, in a way, I see another pattern here, and it's like I've mentioned before. There's patterns in the cults, patterns in the false prophets, patterns in the false religions. And if you're coming from a perspective of a false religion, well, obviously you've got a lot of, because it is false, there's going to be some problems to deal with. And what I've noticed in listening to Muslim apologists and debaters that are defending Islam and trying to attack Christianity and things, is that they basically pick and choose what they want. Now, that's a dead giveaway on a false religion. They've got to pick and choose what they want. They're stuck with the Bible because the Qur'an talks about the Bible and recognizes the Bible and says good things about the Bible. So they're stuck with that. So what they have to do then, because the Bible contradicts Islam so badly on so many key points, is they have to pick and choose what they want to use. And in debate, for instance, they'll take parts of the Bible that they want to accept and that tie in with some of their own beliefs, and they'll quote those like they're okay. Mm-hmm. But other passages of the Bible that don't agree with what Islam teaches, well, that's no good, that's interpolated, that's a contradiction, it doesn't make any sense, so we don't accept it. Well, here, the reason the Gospel of Barnabas is so, as Steve was just saying, a temptation to Muslim debaters and Muslim people in general, is because there's places in there that it talks about Muhammad, and in this reference right here out of chapter 84, page 191, Jesus made prayer in union with the messenger of God and heard Muhammad's voice. Well, that's very, Muslims would like that.
Right.
They'd like that very much. And so they would pick that one, and this is one reason they use the Gospel of Barnabas. They pick out the things out of it that they find useful to them, and forget about the other stuff that would contradict the Quran or problems in it. They just push that under the rug. Mm-hmm. And so I'm saying, what I'm seeing here is a pattern in that wherever the Bible says something I don't agree with as a Muslim, well, forget it. Okay, I'm going to use this, in the same context, I'm going to use this Gospel of Barnabas, and it's going to say something in a few places that I like, so I'll use it. But in other places, let's forget it.
Right.
And so I'm just saying that, in my opinion, is not honest, and it's a symptom of a false religion, because a false religion has to do things like that to justify itself, because it can't stand on all the facts, all the evidence. Give me the whole thing. No, we'll just pick and choose the parts that we like and forget the rest. Right. And I just wanted to bring that out because that just seems to be a typical pattern, and one reason why Muslims go to the Gospel of Barnabas. Mm-hmm. They want to pick the things out of it that they want to use and cunningly ignore the things that, or hopefully no one knows about, right, the other problems. Right. And that's just not honest, that's false, and it's reflective of a false religion. Anyway, right. Go ahead.
So one view, which I think we've eliminated, is we can't say that the Gospel of Barnabas was an authentic document that was reliably preserved. Okay. Now Muslims, they might want to say, well, maybe it was corruption of something. So maybe there were parts in it that were true, like maybe all the parts about Muhammad, and then maybe all the other things we brought up weren't true. So, but that's just idle speculation. It's like, why wouldn't you say that the other parts were true and the parts about Muhammad were the corruptions? Because there's no evidence one way or the other. However, I don't say that the Gospel of Barnabas, the Italian Gospel of Barnabas, was a corruption of an early thing. I think the whole thing was made up. And when we try to find who made it up, we can look at some of the evidence.
Are there some clues who wrote the Gospel of Barnabas?
Yes. For one thing, the Arabic notes in the margin might be a clue. According to David Sachs, the Arabic notes, they weren't written by an Orthodox Muslim, because maybe by someone who just converted Islam and didn't know a bunch of stuff correctly or something, and because they had some problems in there. And they say that the binding on the book was a kind of an unusual dark green oriental type, and it was very similar to the binding of a Turkish document of 1575 in the Venetian archives, and we think those were done in Constantinople, at least the binding part. And of course 1575 is after Constantinople fell, so in 1453, so it was Muslim at that time. So so if the binding is the same with this other book, it was probably that. In addition, we know that the Quran was translated into Italian in 1547, and as we saw before, the writer of the Gospel of Barnabas didn't know biblical history very well, nor Orthodox Muslim theology, but they knew the European medieval customs. They had those down pretty well. And if you look at the Italian it was written in, it wasn't quite standard Italian. It's the sort of a Venetian dialect, but also sort of an influence of a Tuscan dialect from Tuscany too. And there are some Latin spellings of stuff, and even some influences, some stuff thrown from Dante.
In fact, that's a very key point, because you can look at let's say the evolution of the English language. Mm-hmm. People talk a lot different today than they did 200 years ago. And you go back another 200 years ago, they talk even more. You take an old 1611 King James Bible, mm-hmm. and you open it up, and there's all this old-time language in there, and the these and the thous and all that, and it'll be using words like carriage. And we see the word carriage in our day and age. We think, oh, that's like a horse and buggy. That's you jump on it and you take a ride through the park or something like that. But in their day, carriage meant like a luggage, like a sack or a suitcase.
Something to carry.
Yeah, something to carry your stuff in. And so the language has shifted and changed over time. Mm-hmm. And that happens with almost any language. Over time, things change. That's why they always have to come out with new dictionaries and things. They add in the new slang terms that weren't around 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. In fact, I often think, in new terms of vocabulary words. We think of the word internet. But let's say in the 1950s, if you walked on, you jumped in that movie Back to the Future and took a time, took a DeLorean back to 1955, jumped out there and said, hey, I need a website for the internet, from some man on the street in 1955.
They have no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly. So what you're saying then is the dead giveaways in this Italian version of the Gospel of Barnabas are there in the language themselves. Itself.
And Italian is the only language that the Gospel of Barnabas is written in, to our knowledge.
Right. So any honest man looking at this kind of evidence should be able to know you can't take the Gospel of Barnabas seriously. It's just not. The evidence is too overwhelming. It contradicts the Bible. It contradicts the Quran. It contradicts history. The anachronisms in it give it away. There's no manuscript evidence for it dating past the Middle Ages back to the early church. And yet, Muslim apologists and spokesmen keep bringing this up. And as Steve mentioned before, earlier in the program, he mentioned that the Gospel of Barnabas he's using was published in, Lahore, Pakistan, which I believe is a Muslim country.
Right.
And so there's a reason why the Muslims are using this. But, as I said already, it's a dishonest use. If we already know there's enough evidence to disqualify it as a factual document, why use it at all? but yet we find the Muslims publishing it, distributing this thing around the globe, and then Muslim spokesmen using it. And I say once again, this is because the book is dishonest, yet it's being used by these people. That shows that they then are dishonest in using something that is easily proved to be a forgery, a fraud. What would you think of me if I come up to you and try to sell you something that's a fraud? It's not true. If you sign this document, you give me $200. This is a land deed for a certain part of the face of the moon. You can buy part of the moon today. And you've got a little map on here. It shows you what part of the moon you're buying. It'll give you at least 20 acres. And if you sign this and give me $200, you're home free. You know, I mean, it's just valid to do something like that. It's just dishonest. And that's all I'm trying to show. And if a false religion has to use false stuff, I think that just proves the point. But a true religion doesn't have to resort to these kinds of things.
Right.
If it's the truth, you can use factual, truthful data to prove your case without having that go to fraudulent documents.
That's a good point. Well, one question we haven't answered here is that if the Gospel of Barnabas is not an ancient document but a medieval forgery, who wrote it? And we don't know for sure, but we have three kind of suspects.
So the people at home can see the chart, the suspects.
Yep.
Too bad you don't have some mug shots of them, you know, with their faces and
Yeah.
with the the height markers behind
police
them
thing,
at
yeah.
the police station.
Fra Marino was the father inquisitor of Venice from 1542 to 1550, and perhaps he did this out of revenge. Felice Peretti, who was the future Pope Sixtus V, was a severe, devoted inquisitor of Venice who made many enemies. And in the 16th century, there were a number of trials for Protestantism and Anabaptism, and trials for blasphemous speech and sorcery. But in the 1530s, Venice was criticized for being too tolerant, and there was an Augustinian friar who was punished for teaching heresy at, of all places, the Church of St. Barnabas in Venice. And this is according to David Sachs. A handwriting analysis of Fra Marino's handwriting and the Gospel of Barnabas shows that they could have come from the same hand. Okay,
very good.
so looking at this, you'd say, well, then it's pretty much all settled. It's probably Fra Marino. On the other hand, though, there are a couple of other things that look pretty...
More suspects.
Yeah. Another one is Anselmo Tormeda, who later converted to Islam and became Abdallah ibn Abdallah. He was from Majorca, Spain. He studied in Bologna for 10 years. And in his biography, written 1383 to 1390, he claimed to be a priest before his conversion to Islam. His teacher at Bologna was a crypto-Muslim, that is a secret Muslim, Dea Palza, and he says he was a converted Franciscan who took revenge on Christianity after his conversion to Islam. And since he was from Majorca, Spain, the fact that it mentions Spanish coins kind of lends support to this theory. Now, other suspects is we found other gospel forgeries, and these were written by Moors in Arabic, and these are from Granada, Spain. The only thing negative against this theory is there weren't any of these known prior to 1588, and the Gospel of Barnabas, we think, was maybe a little earlier than that, maybe 1575 or even earlier. So, to kind of conclude, if you're a Muslim and somebody gives you a book and says, hey, this ought to be a new surah in the Qur'an, you probably have a lot of questions. And if you ask these questions, and if it didn't hold up, they contradicted the Quran, it contradicted history, it contradicted, what we know of the geography, and it wasn't even a very good forgery, you'd probably just laugh it off, or you'd probably say, no, this doesn't belong here. Well, Christians say the same thing, and so we're somewhat baffled why Muslim apologists often point to the Gospel of Barnabas and say, well, it maybe is predominantly true, and just because it has Muhammad's name in it and may have been written by a Muslim, in actual fact, and they like to point to that, and that's one of the arguments they have to use to try to prove that that Islam is correct.
Okay, now I think we've given sufficient evidence and data to prove beyond a shadow of doubt the Gospel of Barnabas is a joke. Okay, it's just not true, and anyone that would stoop to using a fraudulent document like this to substantiate something has to actually, if we know the evidence on it, has to actually be invalidating their own position by using it to prove something, because you don't use fraudulent and fake material to try to get to the truth of any matter. And to me, it's very revealing when someone uses a document like this. It's very revealing to show that they simply are using dishonest methods to make a point or an argument to deceive people. So don't be deceived by this particular thing. And as you know, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, this is show number 8, I believe it is already. I'm starting to lose count here. Show number 8 in this Islam series. And the title of our overall series is, Can Believing the Muslim Religion Send Someone to Hell? And as I said before, hell is a biblical term that Muhammad, years later, lifted from the context of the Bible and put into the Quran. And so when you have the Quran mentioning hell, it was simply borrowed from the writings before it, which were the Old and New Testaments. Well, Steve, what we want to go to now with our time remaining is answering that question for our viewers, and maybe highlight a little bit of the different things we've talked about throughout all these shows in the series. Can believing the Muslim religion send someone to hell? We've already established the fact that it's not Christians using the Gospel of Barnabas to prove the truth and validity of Christianity.
Right.
It's the Muslims using a fraudulent document to try to substantiate their position and attack Christianity, which to me undercuts their own position actually, and shows that they're the ones using falsehoods. But don't just settle for what I'm asking you on that. Kind of tie in all of the different things we've talked about in Islam in the series and tie it into the question, can the Muslim religion send you to hell?
Okay, it's basically, if you look at the evidence, you say, well, is the Quran compatible with the Bible as it has been preserved? No, it is not. Does the Quran have internal contradictions? Yes, it does. Does the Quran have external problems? Yes, it does. So the Quran is not from God. For the majority of Muslims who hold to the Bukhari Hadiths, then what do the Bukhari Hadiths say? They have a lot of things that are fairly ridiculous also. And so that can't be from God.
Well, like I said, what did the Hadith say about Muhammad? He could be bewitched by the devil.
Right. Which I'm not sure that's so ridiculous. That one's not so ridiculous.
But Hadith,
using the stars are to throw at devils. We haven't seen any stars move.
What about fly medicine?
That's right. If a fly drops in a liquid, you need to put it back in because the other wing, one wing may have the poison, but the other has.
That's right out of the Hadiths.
Right.
And so, like I said before on our other show, I'm wondering why the pharmacies, like at our grocery stores or Walgreens or something, they don't have just a whole bunch of fly cages,
right? And
they just make all their medicine using the fly wings. Just make sure they pull a right wing.
Right.
Okay, what do a guy comes up to the counter, says, "Well, I'm sick, I need some medicine." Okay, well, hold on, let me get this glass of water here. And they should have each wing diagnosed as which one has the antidote and which one has the disease. Okay,
right.
This side has the disease, so I better pull this one. This has got the antidote. Drop it in the water and have the guy drink it right there. That'll be $15, please.
Yeah.
But the problem is things like that. And to me, what's really devastating is that Muhammad himself could be giving something that's supposed to be from Allah, but really it's the devil telling them things.
Right.
I want to make sure we got that in, because that's stuff we went in detail in previous shows. So anyway, keep going what you're doing. I just was jumping in from some of this.
So with all of these things, it's like, well, who was this Allah? Well, Allah was the kind of national or tribal god of the Quraysh, and Allah had 3 daughters, and Muhammad seemed to take a lot of practices in common with the Quraysh and their use of Allah, and he cut off some stuff. He said Allah didn't have daughters, at least after the Satanic verses, and he combined it with Quraydhah took him to have someone read the gospel to him, and he knew of the Torahs. He apparently knew of some apocryphal literature, and it all kind of came together, and then it spread predominantly by the sword.
Believe Islam or die.
Yeah, both at Mecca, and then it spread out through Syria, and it continues to spread by the sword today.
It's a very violent and warlike type religion.
Yeah, they claim to be the religion of peace, but it's a very sad thing for the Muslims that are killing many Christians now in Indonesia and in the Sudan. And one thing about that, I've almost never seen a Muslim been able to say anything about that. I tried to get this one Muslim guy I was corresponding with to say that killing people in cold blood for the sake of Islam was wrong, but he never would say that. And I did only find one answer about Islam and human rights by a Muslim, and basically he said, well, everything comes from God, and Allah, all rights come from Allah, and if Allah didn't give you the right to live, if you're not a Muslim or Christian or Jew, so therefore there is no human rights issue. But anyway, for all these reasons, so if you want to look into all the details like we did, if you want to look at the overall tone and message of Muhammad, and you want to look at the practice of the majority of Muslims today, I'm not talking to small numbers of extreme sects or cults, I'm talking about the majorities. Then for all of these reasons, you have all these things that lead to the same answer, that Islam is not the same religion as Christianity, and when they reject Jesus, then Islam will send people to hell.
So believing Islam can send you to hell. Of course, according to the Hadiths, according to Muhammad, most of the people in hell, the majority of them are women because of they're deficient in their mind.
And they were ungrateful. Well, it's because they're ungrateful to their husbands.
Oh, that's right. I confused the hadiths because the deficient in mind came because they only have half the witness of a man in a court of law or something like that.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah. Most of them were in hell ungrateful to their husbands, and a different hadith says that they have half a witness because of deficiency of their minds.
Okay, I just got the two Muhammad teachings about women confused there about the hell and deficiency in mind. But anyway, the problem is if you're a woman, watch out. Muhammad says the majority of women or the majority of people in hell are women. But anyway, we're running out of time, brother. We've talked all this stuff about Islam. Spend a minute or so telling us the virtue of Christianity and the Lord Jesus Christ in contrast to Muhammad and Islam.
Okay. Well, first of all, in agreement with Islam, there is only one God who is the creator of everything, and while there are lots of little idol gods, those are all false gods. Okay? But in contrast to Islam, God, being almighty, can do anything he wants to do. If he wanted to appear on the earth, he has the power to do so. If he wanted to appear on the earth as a human being, he has the power to do so. If he wanted to appear and be incarnated in human form, he can do so. When Jesus was on earth, heaven was not empty, though. It's not like all the universe just fell crashing down because Jesus was there. No, God was able to be in heaven, and at the same time, he's able to be in Jesus on earth. And God's message to us is that all of us have fallen short of God, and whatever set of rules we have tried to follow, be it the rules of the Bible and the Old Testament, be it rules of Islam, be it rules of some other religion, even if you're following the wrong rules or the right rules, whatever's right, no one has succeeded in being perfect in following all the rules. All of us, Jesus accepted, need forgiveness for our sins. Jesus provided the way for us to do that. God is not an arbitrary God who can punish some sin severely and just wink at other sin. God is a just God who has to be just. He will punish all sin equally. And so if God's going to punish all sin equally and yet he wants us to go to heaven, then Jesus Christ came and he took the punishment for our sin. The sacrifice of the lamb and sacrificing was something that the Jews practiced for almost 1,400 years. And when Jesus came, he paid the penalty for our sins, and it's by accepting his free gift and free offer and accepting him as our Savior and as our Lord that we can have eternal life.
Right, and go to heaven and not hell.
Right.
Well, thank you, brother, for that. We're out of time. This is Larry Wessels with Steve Morrison of Christian Answers. Steve being our Director of Research for Christian Answers. If you have any further questions, please call or write us. The numbers and address come at the end of the show. You can get a free issue of our Christian Answers newsletter, resource list. We have plenty of tracts and other information on Islam and other subjects. Feel free to call us. Thank you for being with us. Remember, Jesus Christ is the answer. Jesus is the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, not Muhammad. And trust the Bible, because the evidence is there for the Bible. The evidence is not there for the Quran. Check it out for yourself. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Join us next time. Muslim friend, please do not make this eternal mistake, but believe what Jesus said and not what Muhammad said, for Islam is a religion of unbelief and of making an idol of Muhammad, a man who denied what Christ said.
check out our websites. BibleQuery.org. This site answers 7,700 Bible questions. HistoryCart.com. This site reveals early church history and doctrine, proving Roman Catholicism is not historically or doctrinally viable. MuslimHope.com. This site is a classic refutation of Islam, a counterfeit religion created by Muhammad. Free newsletters are also available.